Hello and welcome to The Price of Football, the show that looks at the money behind the beautiful game with me, Kevin Day, and Liverpool University's Kieran Maguire. Later in the show, we'll hear from Miles Jacobson, Studio Director of Sports Interactive, the company behind the Football Manager series of video games and the creators of the original Championship Manager. As it happens, I'm afraid I wasn't available to help the interview, but I don't think that was an issue because for Kieran, talking to somebody about a football game that basically is a glorified spreadsheet was a little bit of almost like Disneyland for you, Kieran, I imagine, wasn't
it? He was absolutely brilliant. Yes, it was a thoroughly enjoyable time had by me. I can't speak on behalf of Miles, of course.
I'm sure he had a wonderful time, Kieran. I looking at some of the research I did anyway, just to help with questions. There's some similarities between you both, Kieran. Especially the thoroughness with which you approach numbers in particular. A couple of news stories first, Kieran. In fact, more than a couple. I don't even know how to begin reading out this first one, Kieran, because it's got words in it that even a year ago I don't think I'd be asking you to explain about the NFT-based fantasy sports platform, Sorare, and what they've been up to this week. But they've agreed a deal with more than one team, haven't they?
Yes, they've signed up 5 clubs in the EFL, including the likes of Norwich and Millwall. For people not familiar with Sorare, that it's
Sorare.
I think it's it's Sorare. It could be. I think you make it sound a little bit more glamorous.
Sorare. Ooh, yeah.
They describe it as a form of online fantasy league. So I thought, well, I'll have a look. I went onto the app and I signed up, and I must confess, within 5 minutes, I was completely confused. But effectively, what happens is that you are a bit like Panini. You pay money in effect, and you can buy cards, and then the players that you buy with your cards, they earn points based on their actual performance in matches. So clearly, having Kylian Mbappe, having Haaland and so on, those players are so rare, as it were. And therefore, in theory, you can then sell the players. So this is where it sort of it moves away from me. Online fantasy league, collecting cards, that's fine. I openly admit I still connect Panini cards, and I'm supposed to be an adult, but I collect them because it's a bit of harmless waste of time, and it is not an investment. The issue with Sorare is that when you buy players, you have to either use your credit or debit card, or you can use cryptocurrency, which I think effectively, nudge, nudge, wink, wink, you're encouraged to use.
Yeah.
And then in theory, if your players do well, then you can sell them at a profit, assuming, of course, that there's someone to buy them. So people claim what we might call the crypto bros, the NFT bros, the people who say, I now drive a Lamborghini and live in LA as a result of getting involved in things like this. Whereas in reality, they're living in a bedsit, having pot noodles every night. There's nothing wrong with pot noodles. There is nothing wrong with living in a bedsit, by the way. But this is where I am uncomfortable that it's being marketed, to be fair, not by the clubs. I went on to Norwich's website, and they admittedly at the very bottom of the announcement of the deal to say the value of your cards can go down as well as up, which they're obliged to say, but at least they are saying it. But really, they should say that in all probability it is going to go down. It's the equivalent of buying a lottery ticket, and part of me says, don't. If you're going to believe a get-rich-quick scheme, then I've not got a huge amount of sympathy. We've seen various schemes promoted by the likes of John Terry, Michael Owen, Paris Hilton. Well, I wouldn't take investment advice from them if I met them down the pub. So therefore, I wouldn't take it from them if it's online promoting some form of token or card. It's money for the clubs. I personally, I think it's one of those things which works out as too expensive to actually get any real enjoyment from it, because you have to keep buying the cards to have a competitive team. But if that's what you want to do, it's your money.
Is it unusual, Kieran, for Sorare, to have a deal with 5 teams at once, or do you think they would have approached more teams and maybe tried to get the whole of the championship involved?
I suspect they've approached quite a few, and we could be having a further announcement in due course. I think it's very much an open secret that the Premier League are looking at this in some depth. Whether they do a deal with Sorare or another similar organisation is yet to be decided. There's talk of the Football Association having some form of either card or NFT deal going forwards. And the clubs are in the main losing money. This is a way of getting extra cash. Is it a victimless situation? Well, it depends upon the behaviour of the people that buy the cards. If like me, I get halfway through my Panini collection and get bored, then I've not suffered, except the level of financial financial cost that I've chosen to incur. My reservation is that people can become slightly addicted to these, because you will be bombarded with messages on your device. But from the club's point of view, they've got 5. I suspect that we could see a few more clubs get involved. They've certainly got other clubs in the upper leagues of other European countries as well.
I know you say, Kieran, that Panini stickers are not an investment, but I'm guessing if somebody's got like full sets going back to when it first started, they'd be worth a few bob, wouldn't they?
Yeah, if you've got a full set of 74 or 78, you absolutely. But then they are 40, 45 years old, and if you hold on to something and it's in pristine condition from 40 to 45 years, if you've got an original Game Boy boxed, it's even though they sold millions of them, it's worth a few quid. But that's not the same as making you a millionaire. Will you get your money back on it? Yes, you will. Will you make a profit compared to what you spent in 1974? Yes, you will. But you're not going to get hugely rich on the back of it. And I think that's what people have to be aware of. And if you get a bit of fun, go ahead and do it. Just watch the cost. It's a bit like what we're now seeing, and I think this is something which has gone under the radar. If people, we're talking to Miles later, and if you have FIFA, you can buy what's referred to as, I think they've referred to as loot boxes, whereby if you want to improve your ultimate team, you effectively buy the equivalent of players, but you don't know what you're buying. So it encourages people to spend more and more money, and that is quite common in the gaming industry, and it's not an avenue I would encourage if you are a parent with kids.
I have to say, Kieran, I have no idea what anything you said in the last minute means. I shall take it that it was significant. 2 stories about London clubs and naming rights. The first one is slightly odd because this club has to pay, it looks like, to get a naming rights deal.
Yes. So here we're looking at West Ham. Now, West Ham presently play in the London Stadium, which we sort of call the London Stadium, but I still think of it as the Olympic Stadium. The stadium is owned by LLDC, the London Legacy Development Corporation, who rents the stadium for an agreed number of days to West Ham United. And they went on, I think, a conference call about a week ago, and they said, Well, West Ham are sort of the prime tenant as far as the stadium is concerned. If West Ham want to have a deal, then we are willing to allow them to change the name of the stadium, but we want the first £4 million, and then the rest is, well, it could be up for negotiation. It could be that West Ham get all of the remainder, or it could be that LLDC get a percentage of the remainder. Clearly, that's up for discussion between the two parties. I think it's fairly well acknowledged that the negotiators on behalf of the owners of the stadium probably got their pants taken down when West Ham organised the rental arrangement. It's £2.5. It was £2.5 million. It's gone up to around about 3.5, but West Ham have got a lot more seats in it. West Ham have got a fantastic deal, and I part of me doesn't have an issue with that, because if you go into negotiations and you negotiate well, then that's sort of a testament to your ability and the other party's inability. When the other party is a representative of the taxpayer, that's just disappointing, but it's the nature of business. So West Ham could make some money out of this. LLDC could make some money out of this. So again, I think this is a potential positive, and it would allow the ultimately the taxpayer to recoup more money. So there could be a benefit from that perspective as well. In terms of the fee, it's difficult to work out, because the stadium has been there for quite a few years already. So there's an element of wait and see. But if West Ham get 10, 15 million from it, even if they have to give half of that to LLDC over the first 4 million, that pays for a couple of players' wages. And I think that's the way the club will look at it. And the government or the local government will be able to say, well, we're now recouping a lot more money than we originally expected to. So it's a win-win deal.
And meanwhile, Kieran, Spurs are in talks with Google about naming rights for their stadium. And if the London Evening Standard is to be believed, it's for a huge amount of money, but also they're planning a multi-million-pound upgrade of part of the ground already, so they'll need some of that money.
Yes. Spurs, I really admire from a business point of view. Clearly, I wasn't saying that on Saturday afternoon when Harry Kane scored the winner against us. But as far as their pitch is concerned, I'm sure many listeners are aware that it's a retractable pitch because they do have a deal with the NFL. But the downside of the stadium is that it takes 48 hours to wheel the pitch in and replace it with one which is appropriate for NFL. So there's a bit of squeaky bum time. So Spurs are looking at advances, and that they are a very technologically adept club. They're looking at potential changes in technology, which will allow them to get that pitch in faster. That will, A, it will please the groundsman. B, knowing Spurs, that they'll have done their sums and they reckon they can get a return on their investment as well, because that will allow them to do even more events. And we've said on many an occasion that football's a pretty daft business, in the sense that most football clubs are open for business 25 days a year. And Tesco's isn't, Apple isn't, the Parsons Arms isn't, and therefore anything which makes a club stadium multi-function and multi-income stream is going to benefit it from a financial point of view.
And what about their naming rights?
Well, I think we mentioned this a few days ago. They've done really well to not have most people thinking, well, it's still at White Hart Lane, so why aren't we calling it White Hart Lane? Yeah. So it is the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, which is a bit of a gobful. When it comes to naming rights, I think you've got to do two things. A, you need a long-term deal, because people won't sign up for it otherwise. And B, it is a case of whoever gets the first name gets all of the value, because people don't refer to the Macron or the University of Bolton Stadium. It's the Reebok. People don't refer to Coventry Building Society Stadium; they refer to I'm going to Coventry. I'll see you at the Rico, and so on. Mm. The nature of the people that Spurs are allegedly in conversation with, and certainly reading the articles, we are still a fair way from signing it, but I still think we could have a deal signed by the end of the year. I think Spurs are probably looking for 20 to 25 million pounds a year for at least a 10-year deal. Certainly, if we take a look at what we've seen in the States, they've all been very much long-term deals. And if so, that gets back a pretty big chunk of what it costs to build the stadium in the first place.
Yeah, and it seems to be Google, isn't it, that's in pole position according to the local press?
Yes, yeah, and again, that would make sense. It is an amazing stadium. It's going to attract a global brand. Spurs are at the right end of the Premier League from a sponsor's point of view. They are regularly playing in the Champions League. Yeah, they might even be playing in Super League variant 2, for all we know, in a few years' time. But that's another topic, of course. So, I'd expect a big player, Google, Amazon. I think we've seen some potential interest from India and China as well. So I think Spurs are actually in a strong position whereby they can effectively play off potential suitors against each other.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to the amusing confusion, Kieran, as well, when away fans have to Google. How do I get to Google? You and I, Kieran, are both, I think it's fair to say, fans of The Athletic. And every now and again, at least once a week, I will get in touch with you and say, The Athletic, we've got this brilliant football finance story. Have you seen it? And you go, I gave them the figures. But this one, this one really caught my eye. It's about Man United, and it's about the money they've spent doing something they do quite often.
Well, yeah, that's something they do quite often over the course of the last decade. They did have that very long period of time under Sir Alex, where it was a very stable ship. He once phoned up my house on Christmas Day, which was a very surreal experience. But that's for the live show, I think. What we're talking about is the cost of replacing people, the redundancy costs. So when Sir Alex retired, he went, but all of his support staff effectively lost their jobs as well, because David Moyes was coming in and he wanted to employ his own people. So the likes of Mickey Phelan and so on, they were moved on. That cost them £2.5 million. David Moyes didn't last a season. Many people will recall. And I think there was a bit of shock. He'd signed a 6-year contract, and a lot of people thought, 6 years at probably £7 million. This is be an absolute fortune. But what I think people didn't realise was that there was a clause in David Moyes' contract. This was a bit canny by United that said, if the club fails to qualify for the Champions League in the first year of which you are managing the club, instead of having to pay up the remainder of the contract, we only have to pay you up 12 months. So, people probably don't remember this, but Manchester United, I think they lost on the Sunday, which meant they couldn't qualify for the Champions League the following season, and Moyes was sacked on the Monday, because that effectively triggered the ability. It saved Manchester United a lot of money. So we had Moyes, then we had Van Gaal, who was rewarded for winning the FA Cup by being sacked by Manchester United. That's another £8 million. The special one came in. He took them to, I think it was, were they runners up and they won the Europa League? But then he got the sack a few months later. That was another £20 million. And then we've seen in this year's account, which have just come out, we know that Solskjaer and his assistants got about £10 million. And then there was another £15 million, which was paid out in the last quarter. So, I thought, and I think many other people thought, blimey O'Reilly, that's a lot of money for Ranić, given that he only came in as effectively an interim manager. But in the absence of any other information. So, I'd put out, and I think some other people, Rangnick somehow managed to trouser £50 million. All I can say, I was contacted by Rangnick sources to say, not on your Nelly. He effectively got buttons because his contract was to the end of the season. So it does make you wonder who were the recipients of this £15 million. Has any of that gone to Ed Woodward? Has some gone to Matt Judge, who I think was quite involved in recruitment? But you wouldn't expect a recruitment person to be on millions and millions. So it is intriguing. There was also, I think, when Ed Woodward left, there does appear to have been a bit of a night of the long knives in senior management at Manchester United. So it could be that they've had some of these big payouts. But for 15 million quid to be spent in the last quarter of the year, so you add up all of those, and that's it comes to around about 60 million quid since Sir Alex retired. And people go, that's a ridiculous amount of money. Until you say, well, hold on, who appointed all of these people in the first place? It was our very good friends, the Glazers. And what have they done in that intervening period? They've paid themselves 165 million in dividend payments. So yes, it's a lot of money, but compared to what the decision makers have benefited from, it's actually fairly small beer.
Some of you may have noticed a slight difference in the sound quality. It's because Kieran and I are not where we normally are to record this, and being middle-aged men, one of us did something wrong, so we had to switch to Zoom. So that's the reason, and I apologise if that came as a bit of a shock to you. I don't think there'd be much of a difference, but just in case you did notice. Some sad news for a player at your team, Brighton, this week, Kieran, and there are some financial ramifications coming from it as well.
Yeah, and this is a money show, but Enoch and Wepu, we signed him from Salzburg last year, £18 million. It's a lot of money for a club of our size. He's a cracking player. He scored our goal of the season at Anfield. He looked like he was one of those players where, with Brighton, we know that players come, stay a couple of years, and move on to something bigger and better. Well, no, bigger, not necessarily better. But he. Something happened there with. That's very strange. That was Siri joining in our conversation. So as well as Zoom, we've got Siri added into the equation.
Well, it might be because I sent you a WhatsApp message as well.
Oh.
Yeah, we're really not cut out for this level of technology.
So, first of all, really sorry for him because it's his professional career. He's only 24. But horrible thing to say, there are financial issues to arise as well. So first of all, I think we've got to look at it from the perspective of the player. He'd signed a 4-year contract. He'd only been at the club for a year. The club's not saying anything, and I understand why. Ultimately, it's a private conversation between employer and employee. It's none of our business. Talking to some people in football, they say, well, first of all, you normally expect to get 12 months at least. I spoke to a couple of agents, I spoke to a few other people, and the player potentially would have taken out an insurance policy himself, or his representatives would have ensured that he did, which would have means that he gets the majority of the rest of his contract paid up. Wherever he goes, I wish him all the best. He's, we both know people that know people at football clubs, and he's one of the good guys. As far as the club is concerned, they paid £18 million for a player. If there's any instalments remaining on that, Salzburg say, well, it's not our problem. You're obliged to pay them. So Brighton are going to have to go and pay up for all outstanding instalments, and they're going to have to write off that contract. So that's going to be a big hit to their accounts. They might have insurance. They might not. Insurance policies on football players, having spoken to some people in the insurance industry saying, well, clubs are reluctant because the premiums are so high. and some clubs effectively say we will self-insure. Yeah, we will put money that we would have paid into an insurance pot into a separate bank account and let that build up with a view to effectively saying we can go into the transfer market with that at a later date. So all I can say, I'm a fan of the lad, I'm a fan of the club, of course, is that wherever he chooses to go, I wish him well. Also, fans of other clubs have been really supportive in the main, including the vast majority of Palace fans as well, because we do set things aside when the pantomime stops.
Yeah, I'd like to think I speak on behalf of all Palace fans when we, of course, wish him the very best in the future, and hopefully he might still have some sort of career within the game. But it must be heartbreaking for a young man for this to happen. FIFA, Kieran, are very rarely off your naughty step, but but they've managed to move themselves up a couple of steps this week.
Yes, I've been contacted by quite a few fans to say people had bought tickets for the Qatar World Cup, and sometimes people say, well, and I've done this in the past. I've booked tickets for 8 matches and ended up with tickets for 3 because there's no excess demand, and it could be that 2 of them at the start of the tournament and 1 of them's 2 weeks later and it's 1,500 miles away, and you go, I'll probably sack that off. So I've been in contact. I've heard from quite a few fans to say that they bought tickets, and to be fair to FIFA did allow you to put your tickets up for resale, where you'd get the money back if FIFA managed to resell the tickets. So that's all good. That's discouraging touting. It's giving people an opportunity to say, well, my personal circumstances have changed. And the noises I'm getting from fans is they put their tickets up for sale. As far as they're concerned, FIFA appear to have sold them, and the money was supposed to have been paid by FIFA to the fans in September. Now, it ain't September, and there's no communication coming from FIFA. So is it just tardiness on behalf of FIFA? Are a bunch of random people on the internet sending me messages through social media and to my email to wind me up to try to get a story on the podcast? I think that's quite unlikely. But I did speak to some fan groups, and the general consensus was FIFA are pretty disorganized when it comes to fans' rights. They're quite organized when it comes to looking after clubs, to looking after FIFA members. And there's another story that people might have seen that I think FIFA are paying. If you've got a player playing at the World Cup, you're getting $10,000 a day from FIFA for him effectively being away for the club during the competition. And for some championship clubs, this is absolutely fantastic. Because they won't be paying their players $10,000 a day. So there could be some big winners here, and I'm sure FIFA will be quite speedy with those payments. But if FIFA are just being disorganised and slow, I don't think that reflects particularly well on them as an organisation.
Now, Kieran, I'm going to suggest something we've not done before, and Ali will tell me off here for allowing the light to shine in. We shouldn't be doing this. We should keep these things secret. And we're also sort of making policy on the hoof that you and I had a very stern email this evening from Guy. We had a very stern email saying the interview with Miles is very good, but it's quite long. And can we keep the news section a little bit shorter? And we've already gone about 15 minutes over the time limit he gave us. And it's getting quite late, and I don't want to go to bed on a disappointed email from Guy, because he does that. He does that so well. I'm not angry. It must be a nightmare being one of his kids. I'm not angry. I'm just disappointed. That whole "why do I email you when you ignore me" type vibe. So what I'm going to suggest, because the last 2 stories are actually quite big ones.
Yes.
So what I'm going to suggest, Kieran, is that you just give us the headline, but we will then discuss them at length, the length they deserve, at the start of Monday's pod. Should we do that?
That sounds like a deal. Yes. So Yeah, the stories are what's happened at Everton with their auditors, and is the EFL going to break the 3 p.m. Saturday blackout rule?
Yeah, which is, I mean, we've been talking about that blackout rule for quite some time and how sacrosanct it's been. And also, things are starting to get a little interesting at Everton. So we will give those stories the justice they deserve. And in the meantime, Football Manager is more than a game. It's a phenomenon, Kieran, and it grows and develops every year. So we took the opportunity to talk to one of the people who has been with it from the start, Miles Jacobson. And it is a lengthy interview, but it deserves every minute.
Miles, thanks so much for coming on the show. I'm dead excited as a computer games fan myself, and it runs in my family. So when I told my son, who is another, he's much more into this than me. I'm with royalty as far as he's concerned.
Thank you for having me.
Yes. So thank you. So would you say that Football Manager is now one of the main suppliers or drivers of data within the real game? Because I think the lines between football and data have become closer and closer. If you did a Venn diagram, we've still got some managers who, should we say, take the more 70s approach to assessing football, but are you using your data? Is the football industry now sort of a client of Football Manager?
To a degree, yes. We do work with a few clubs. Most of the clubs that we work with are the more data-rich clubs, and they need a starting point. Now, we've got 1,300 scouts around the world. We've got over 500,000 active players and staff members around the world in our database. So it's a pretty good starting point. And then, people that we're working with tend to build on top of it. So they will build algorithms on top. They will put their own scout reports in there. They will be getting data from other suppliers, because anyone who's using data properly in the football world is working with dozens of people to provide data and to provide algorithms to be able to extrapolate that data in the correct way. Now, we're working officially with a handful of clubs, but we know that there are lots and lots and lots of clubs out there who just go out and buy a copy of the game and use it as a reference tool. And that's absolutely a good thing to do. But I would not say it was a good idea to use our data in isolation. Whilst we've got a pretty good strike rate, around 99%, that does mean that we're getting 1% of stuff wrong. We don't claim to be a Bible of football. We are a game that utilizes scouts to come up with opinions on players. We don't use the kind of real data that comes from GPS trackers and things like that. We don't have any of that data in the game. So yeah, it's strange how it's all happened with the data side of things, because we were there very early with the data that we provided. I think, if I remember correctly, the founders of Opta, when asked, why did you set up the business? They went, well, Sports Interactive aren't selling theirs. So we've decided to do it instead. So we were a little bit late to the party on it. But our data, it's everywhere, right? People are playing the game at clubs all over the place. We have around 3,000 footballers and staff members who help us with the game. So we send them a copy of the game early each year, and they give us feedback. we are definitely part of football and part of the football industry. It's kind of art imitating life, imitating art, imitating life, imitating art, to the power of infinity, with what we do on there. But it's quite incredible how people are manipulating all the different data sets from around the world. So yeah, it's huge changes in the football world, and a lot of it is being driven by the football groups. And I think that they are one of the most interesting things to have happened in football, as a change of football in the last few decades. And I think there are more of those to come as well. I don't think I don't think anyone is safe at the moment, from being bought by a group, because particularly when Americans start buying clubs, the other American billionaires tend to want to get involved as well. So the Chelsea takeover, I believe, is going to be a catalyst for a few other deals.
You said a little bit earlier that there's a difference between clubs who use data in the right way and those who don't. Could you, for our listeners and for me, everybody, could you sort of explain what you mean by that?
Yeah. So clubs that use data in the right way are the ones that are taking lots and lots of different sources, and they are using that data to come up with suggestions that they then have other people that can go and watch the players, spend more time deep diving on the players, doing essentially personality checks on the players and due diligence on the player. I think personality checks would probably go down quite badly. So doing due diligence, and coming up with the answers that way. And the clubs that are able to do that tend to be the clubs that don't need to be buying 15 players a year. They need to be buying 1 or 2 players a year and need to make sure that those players are going to fit. So it's using the data in the way of how will this player come into the team? Who will they replace in the team? How are their data points complementary to what we're doing? How are they going to help improve us? People who use the data in the wrong way are, oh yeah, that sounds like a good idea. Let's go and get that player. So if you're looking at that top level, obviously there is a difference between playing for a team down the bottom and playing for a team down the top. So if a player down the bottom or playing in another league is the absolute focal point for that team, and going to the new club, they're not going to be a focal point for that team. How does it affect? How is it going to affect that player's stats? So you need to be able to kind of have predictive tools. You need to be using machine learning as part of that to be able to show you how players are going to come through. And some of the larger clubs, some of whom are groups, some of whom aren't groups, are employing some incredible mathematicians and programmers to be able to do that stuff. Some of the data providers are also working with machine learning to try and predict these things. And there are even some companies now who are offering players to clubs, so are getting mandates to offer players to clubs, who are basically turning around to clubs that might be interested and saying, right, this is why you need to sign this player, and coming in with the dossier. So it works in different ways doing it properly, but what's doing it wrong is just taking some stats from a computer game or taking some stats from GPS and making decisions on whether to sign a player or not based on those, because there's a lot more that goes into it. A lot more that can go into the data. And watching players is still very important, because when you're watching a player on standard TV, you don't actually get to see what they do off the ball much. If you're watching a player on a wide angle, you do get to see it, but because unless you've got a TV the size of a football pitch, you're not able to see a lot of the nuance. So actually going and watching a player, and watching a player for a full 90 minutes, not leaving on 72 minutes, as a lot of scouts do, is still an important part of it, whatever data you have.
One of the things which I find amazing about Football Manager is its immersion in realism, and you've got real world events such as Brexit, and now we've seen some players coming out as gay and so on. What was sort of behind your decision to reflect those in the game? Was it simply just you want to be as realistic as possible, or was there any other motive for that?
The realistic as possible always comes into it. I mean, look, Football Manager, we call it a giant story generator, because every game is different and you're creating your own story whilst you're playing. And if you're going to have a story generator that's unique, then you've got to make it unique every time. So when it came to Brexit, we did Brexit in a very non-political way. Yep. Every single possible combination was in there. There were over 100,000 possible combinations of what could happen with Brexit. And what happened there is the vote came through. I was due to be going away, actually with a charity. That weekend, that trip got cancelled because the charity were worried that all their funding had just gone. With the vote, so they were all scrabbling around. And I sat at home and sat on my sofa and went, right, so how is this going to affect football? And looked through and came up with all the different combinations. And we just thought it would be really interesting to add those combinations to the game. We carried on researching. We spoke to a bunch of academics. We spoke to some politicians. Spoke to some experts, because I still believe experts are important, and came up with the percentage chances, put it in the game, got some death threats. Some people in Ireland weren't particularly happy that there was a 1 in 2 million chance that Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland might decide to be one country. But it was a 1 in 2 million chance, which is what the research had shown us. It would be a tiny chance, but still a chance. But the most interesting part of it was then getting all of the data from it, and particularly the financial data of what happens in different scenarios, and then going and presenting that to Tracy Crouch, presenting that to the opposition, to say, hey, this is what could happen to UK PLC under our model, with the different scenarios, and then went and spoke to other organisations about it as well, who, on the football side of things, who all had very differing views of what Brexit should mean. I'm actually amazed that there ended up being a kind of agreed position on it, based on the conversations that I'd had. But what people forget about Brexit and football, what people forget about football in general, although obviously not on this podcast, is it's not just about the money that the clubs are making, it's also about the surrounding industries. So when we were looking at the financial side of things, we were also looking at, if you can't sign players from abroad anymore, in the harshest version of Brexit, you could hardly sign anyone that was in game. That meant less tourists coming to the UK.
Oh, wow.
So that affects the travel and the leisure industry, because if you look at most Premier League clubs have some season tickets that are owned by travel companies.
Yeah.
Who sell them. You have some clubs who have players from particular countries who have large amounts of people coming in from those countries each week to watch those players. Certainly, I don't know what it's like this time round, but when Fulham have previously been in the Premier League, they have an area that has been used for tourists. It's certainly when people are coming over from the US, it's the club that they tend to go to because they can get in. So that has knock-ons across multiple other industries as well, which all costs the economy. So going that deep into it was really interesting. So that's why Brexit, it was going to add an extra element to the game, and the data was really useful.
Yeah.
And we wanted to show people what the different options were going to be. All the positives and all the negatives. With players coming out, we did it because it's just the right thing to do. It's ridiculous that in 2022, people have to hide who they are. I'm not someone who believes that people should talk about their sexuality unless they want to, but they should be able to, should they want to.
Exactly.
So again, we added that in. I spoke to some footballers who I know are gay but aren't out. I spoke to some sports people who have come out. I spoke to some people behind the scenes at clubs where sports people have come out, and we tried to put those effects in there, which is pretty simple effects, which is you get a boost in your finances because you sell more shirts for a short period of time, and then no one talks about it again, and everyone just forgets because it's a completely natural thing in life. Yes. So why would it be a big deal? So that's how we had it happening in game. We didn't have it in countries where homosexuality is illegal, because we have to be mindful of countries' laws, whether we agree with them or not. But yeah, we do try to be as realistic as possible, because people are escaping when they're playing Football Manager. They're escaping into this world where they are doing a job that they actually want to do rather than doing a job that they don't want to do. And more than 90% of people in the world do a job that they don't want to do. They work incredibly hard for the money to be able to buy a copy of the game, and we want to give them the most immersive experience possible. Our average play times on the PC game are 300 hours a year, and we are incredibly proud of the value for money that we provide to our consumers. So being able to use our voice is also important to us. So we've worked with Kick It Out for 25 plus years. We've worked with War Child for 15 plus years. We provided over 200 million adverts to mental health charities during the pandemic, because us blokes are pretty rubbish talking about our mental health. So being able to be one button click away from getting help was important to me during the pandemic, because when you're all locked away, there's a reason why people who do bad things go to prison, and prison isn't very nice. So being stuck in home prisons, as lots of us were around the world, is also not very nice. And it's really useful that we're able to use our voice and our audience for things like that.
You mentioned War Child. Now you are very immersed in War Child. You're an ambassador for the charity. Could you tell us a little bit more about it, and perhaps how our listeners could help, or sort of the activities of this organisation, which is a terrible thing to say. In an ideal world, it wouldn't be necessary, but that's the case for so many charities.
War Child have a really simple premise. no child's ever started a war, so no child should be affected by war. And unfortunately, around the world, children are affected by war in different ways. So that might be not being able to go to school or not having safe playgrounds to play in, as we've seen in Ukraine just this week. In places like the Democratic Republic of Congo, it involves child soldiers. And I don't want to depress people too much when they're listening to this podcast, but war child go in and try and rehabilitate child soldiers and get them back into society. But the way that they are persuaded to go and fight at 12 and 13 with guns is pretty horrific, and some of the things that are done are horrific. So they work in different ways in different countries, depending on the need, sometimes with local organisations on the ground, sometimes with their own team. They are a lean charity in that the vast majority of money they raise actually goes to the work that they're doing on the ground. They are nimble. They have a good network of partner charities. So I'm an ambassador for War Child UK. There are various war childs that work together in other different countries. But they're able to react very quickly. So they were on the ground in two of the neighbouring countries to Ukraine, where a lot of the other charities weren't, to try and stop kids being people trafficked, basically, as they're crossing the borders. In the most recent thing. And I talk about all this stuff very matter of fact because this is the work that they do. And I know that it's hard for lots of people to hear, but we do have some other interesting projects as well, where you are helping in the post-conflict times. We're trying to get something off the ground at the moment, which is a forestry project in a particular country that is looking to help aid peacekeeping, financial issues, so poverty, as well as hunger at the same time, by getting two villages who used to be at opposite sides of the war to actually work together on planting fruit trees, so that they are so they're able to make money from the crops that they're planting, but also planting some CO2 sucking plants at the same time to try and help with global warming. So they're one of the few organisations I've worked with who are as flexible and nimble, and that's one of the reasons that we work with them. So they get a donation for every game that we sell, up to a capped amount each year. So we hit that cap each year. It helps them know exactly what they're getting. And then I'm an ambassador personally, so try and raise money personally and represent the charity in hopefully in the right way.
Miles, people that don't know, you're a Watford fan.
I am.
Do you play the game as Watford? And if so, do you regularly sack the manager?
So I do play the game as Watford. Once the game is released, I start my Watford save game, and I tend not to get sacked because I've got a bit of an advantage. Particularly at the start of the game, I tend to know who the best players are in the game, and I'm able to try and get them. In my current Watford test, because I've always got a Watford test game as well, I did get promoted in the first season, so there was no meltdown happening at the club. Thankfully, I did have to sell João Pedro and Sarr in the January transfer window, having kept them for the first window, but managed to bring some other players in. So I tend to keep my job. I don't think we're not as trigger happy in game as Mr. Potso is in real life. And I have to say, and I've said this on social media, so it won't be a surprise to the club. Whilst I wish Slaven Bilic every bit of success, and I hope he does very well, I think it was a big mistake to sack Rob Edwards. I was not happy with the decision. I think he's really building something. I'd hoped for a long future with Rob, and I'm disappointed that he didn't get the opportunity to really put his thoughts and ideas into play.
Yeah, all I can say, supporting Brighton, we went through a run of 3 wins in 25 games last season, but we didn't have too bad an end to last season or too bad a start to this season. So not being trigger happy does have some benefits, even if the manager then does go and jump ship. But for £60 million, I'd even be the Crystal Palace mascot for that. So I can understand. You must get an awful lot of contact from people that play the game. What's the most unlikely club that somebody claims to have won the Champions League managing in your experiences?
Wow. And you can pick pretty much any club in Europe, and someone will claim that they've done that. And obviously, I've won the Champions League with Watford, which I would say is unlikely enough. But there are people who will go on very, very, very long journeys with clubs all over Europe, with the aim of doing that. And I hark back to, because I'm a bit old, right? I hark back to the Euros when Denmark won it, and they didn't have a chance. Everyone has a chance. That's the beauty of football.
Or you've upset Mr. Perez with comments like that.
Well, it is harder now with certain teams. Man City this season and the City group are a group that use data incredibly well. I don't think it's fair that they've bought a robot to play as a centre forward this season. It's an interesting experiment for all, but Haaland it's just absolutely immense, and they are going to make it. He is going to make it even harder for everybody else in the Champions League. But if Haaland had stayed at his club in Norway for longer, then maybe he would have fired them into the Champions League. There's so many possible stories in football. So I can't think off the top of my head of the most ridiculous club doing it. But one of the reasons I can safely say is that someone will have done it with most clubs is sometimes people cheat in the game. And to be frank, we don't have a big issue with them cheating. If that's what they get enjoyment from, then that's what they get enjoyment from. So someone somewhere will have won the Champions League with a lower league Romanian team, I'm sure, by using the in-game editor.
Terrific. But you said that the average playing time is 300 hours.
Yeah, it's a hobby.
Yes. Has Football Manager ever been cited in a divorce case?
So yes, although we don't know this officially, Men's Health magazine a few years ago told us that we'd been cited in, I think it was 35 in 1 year. So yeah, I'm sure we have been. But if somebody is spending the time that they should be spending with their partner doing other things, and their partner isn't happy with it, then I expect that there's something wrong in the relationship. So you have to look at the reasons why that person is deciding to spend their time doing that instead. But 300 hours in a year,
that's an average.
Yeah, that's an average, but that's less than an hour a day. If you think how long people who watch soap operas spend watching them each year, or watching Love Island and TV shows like that, video games are just another form of entertainment and another form of escape. So whilst that 300 hours sounds like a lot, when you extrapolate it out, it isn't really that much. But yes, it is an average, and there are some people who play for a couple of thousand hours a year, and I'm glad that we're keeping those people company.
I will use this as an argument because I have been known to spend quite a few hours updating a football finance spreadsheet, and I have somebody at home that doesn't necessarily always approve. He says, how can anybody be excited about Harrogate's accounts coming out at 6 o'clock on a Thursday morning? And I'm genuinely there sort of tapping away. But I always say it's a form of entertainment. It's a hobby. And hopefully the Baroness, along with my very good friend Prosecco, will see sense.
Do you not have the same excuse that I do, though? Which is when if I am playing a computer game, whether it be the one that I work on or whether it be another computer game, I can turn around and say, "Hey, but it's work."
Yes, but then I get accused of working for too many hours.
Okay, fine. So my partner is aware that I work too many hours. So I think I was lucky on that score. It was one of those early conversations that we had
Right.
actually around football rather than around my gaming, which is, I may well love you, but I've been in love with Watford since I'm 7. So I am going to go to every game home and away. If a family wedding happens to be on an away game, I'm going to be at the away game, not at the family wedding. So I set that stall out very, very, very early on in the relationship. Unfortunately, I don't get to every away game anymore, or this season, certainly, partly because of strikes and it being really difficult to get places, but also because of some family stuff, which I'm very open about on Twitter. My mum's not very well, so
sorry to hear that.
So I go and see her every weekend, and sometimes I can't do both. But I certainly still try to get to every game, and I do spend a lot of time playing the game that I work on with my great team and other games as well, because it's important to know what else is going on in the market. But I set that stall up early so that it was understood.
With all the knowledge and the experience that you have generated through Football Manager, have you ever been tempted to buy a football club and run it to see whether you could apply your knowledge and experience to a different scenario, a real world scenario, or are you perfectly happy and don't want the very surreal world that would be football club ownership?
Yes, I have thought about it quite a lot. I don't have the money to do it, but I do know some people who do have the money to do it, and we've spoken about it often. I speak to a lot of clubs about things regularly, so there are questions that I get asked, and because I haven't worked directly in football, I've worked on the peripheries of football. I do see things a little bit differently to a lot of people in the space. I think there are lots of things that football could be doing that they're not, and would one day like to put those things into practice rather than talking to people about them and seeing some of it being put into practice and some of it not. So yeah, it's something that I'd like to do. If someone has a couple of 100 million to burn, come talk to me. I'd be more than happy.
You'll burn it for them.
I would be more than happy to throw it onto a giant fire for you and experiment at a club with doing things a bit differently and seeing what would happen. But yeah, it's something that I would like to be more involved in, but would need to find a way to be able to do both.
Brilliant.
I do think that football. I'm going to go really out on a limb here. I think football's a bit broken still. I think there are some people doing some incredible things in football, but you could still there's some A lot of people in football are scared of change.
Yeah.
And are scared of trying to do things differently and are scared of experimenting. And I fully understand why the stakes are so high in football that you kind of have to get it right every time. But I think football could learn a lot from other sports, and not just team sports, but individual sports as well. On player improvement in particular.
Right.
I think football is, look, you look at clubs' finances, right? Constantly,
Yes.
You can see that there are things in football that are broken.
Yeah.
And when I say that people don't experiment, people do experiment all the time, but they're doing the same experiments every time. And when those experiments haven't worked over and over again, I go back to the question of what's the definition of madness. And we see a lot of madness in football. A lot.
Absolutely.
But then you get people like, and people don't like them, right? People don't like the groups that are coming into football. But some of those groups are incredibly innovative with the things that they're doing. And yes, they're coming in with lots of money, but they are actually doing things well in the background. Whereas people who've been in football for a long time, people who've been who've grown up in the game, tend to have one way of doing things and don't necessarily look outside the box as much. And that's not a criticism. They're doing what they know, and they're doing what they believe is right. But I've worked in an industry for the last 30 years where change happens on a monthly basis.
Yep.
Technology changes on a monthly basis, and you basically have to adapt or you die when you're working in an industry like that. And and football needs to start thinking outside of the box if they're not going to, if they want to get away from the scrabbling around for money and just trying to survive. They've got to start thinking outside the box, in my opinion.
Miles, I'm conscious that I've used up an awful lot of your time, and it's been absolutely fascinating. Football Manager 23, when's it due out?
Comes out on November the 8th.
Right.
So not long to go, and it's really good fun. So we will, as always, provide a free demo for the game, so you can try it before you buy it. We are I've spoken a lot about value for money on this podcast. I don't want anyone spending their hard-earned money without having an idea of what they're getting. So that's why we provide a free half-season demo, which is around 10 hours of play for most people, between 5 and 10 hours of play for most people who play it. So yeah, I hope people enjoy it.
Great. Do you, just out of interest, do you think there's a gap in the market for Football Finance Manager?
I don't think as a game on its own that would work. I think that there's probably room for some of the games on the market to add those things in as roles. But we have to be very careful when it comes to the game, because we don't want people to need to have an economics degree or an accountancy degree to be able to play it. So there are certain things like amortization, which is a word that obviously is mentioned a lot on the podcast. Having amortization in the game, in the financial models, there might be some that's going on in the background, but in the foreground, you don't hear that much about it.
Absolutely.
Because people would just start crying, right? As they're playing, as anyone who has to deal with amortization in real life probably does on a regular basis. We also don't have inflation in the game. Because that would cause too much havoc. And no one would believe it. I know, who believes the inflation rate that we have in the UK at the moment?
Yeah, exactly.
It's just, it's so scary. So having that happening inside a game doesn't happen. So we have a lighter financial model in the game.
Miles, thank you so much. This has been fascinating, illuminating. and as a fan of the game, I'm not teaching on the 9th or the 10th of November deliberately. So if anybody out there from the media was thinking of contacting me those days, I probably won't be answering my phone.
Excellent. That's what I like. The use of holidays does go up in the week that the game comes out, and of course people are officially Christmas shopping.
Exactly.
But they can do that online now whilst they're playing the game, so it's all good. But thank you so much for having me on today as well, Kieran. As you know, I really enjoy the podcast myself, so it's an honour and a privilege to be on here.
I mean, Kieran, what I take away from, the amount of detail, the amount of thoroughness they put into that game, but also the amount of detail they put into situating it in the real world and virtually coming up with every potential thing that could happen in politics and in society, and including that just in case it does. It's an immense job they're doing, isn't it?
It's an amazing piece of work, and the fact that so many people in football are using it as part of their armoury these days is great. And I was delighted that Miles said yes, they had been cited in real divorce cases, or such is the addictive nature of the game. As I said, when I'm playing at times, I'll be there tapping away, and the Baroness will just looks at me and she says, "Why can't you be watching porn like other blokes instead of playing that bloody game?" So yeah, that's how immersive it is. It's a work of art, and I love it to bits.
Who do you play as?
Well, Brighton, of course.
Oh, okay, all right. Don't get edgy with me. I'll be citing that game in a divorce case. That's your attitude. Thanks to everyone who's donated to the pod via our Patreon page, including Tony Moles, Matt Slocum, Darren Leithley, Steve Miles, Joseph Duda, James Johnson, Andrew Dearden, Gary Palmer, Thomas Vale, Anthony Lockton, and Sustainababble. If you'd like to make a small monthly contribution to the pod, that's very kind of you. Then please go to patreon.com/priceoffootball. Don't forget our next live show will take place at Plymouth Argyle's home park on Tuesday, the 13th of December. Some tickets are still available from Plymouth Argyle's website. And if you have a question you'd like answered on the show, email us at questions@priceoffootball.com. And in the meantime, I shall hand you over to Mr. Kieran Maguire for his customary farewell.
Well, thank you very much, Patreons. It's a fantastic support. We really do appreciate it. And there's another way in which you can show your appreciation and your positive vibes towards the show. And that's to go on to your app, which you use to listen to the show. And if you can give us a review, if you think we're worth 5 stars, give us 5 stars. It helps us in the charts. It helps us with algorithms. And I tried explaining that to Miles before we recorded the show, and you know when you can sense that people are just being very patient with you. Okay, I think you know a lot more about this than I do. But it's the stars that count as far as the review is concerned. You can write whatever you want. So you could even say you'd rather have the show presented by Alan Hansen and Charles Manson, and we wouldn't care. It makes no difference to us.
Is this your new theme now?
That's right.
Ex-players and serial killers.
Yes.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
The price of football. The price of football.